What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Thursday, so time to take a look at a difficult draft decision, break it down so we know who to be drafting. The most voted on last week was Brandon Ayuk versus Jalen Waddle versus Devonta Smith, but seems like Ayuk is going to get traded to the Steelers. That trade seems imminent. Probably shouldn't be breaking him down with that happening. Second most voted on was Pickens versus Tank Dell versus T. Higgins. Again, seeming like Ayuk might get traded to the Steelers, so we kind of don't want to talk about George Pickens until that happens. So we're going to have to go with the third most voted on this week. That is Ja'Marr Chase versus Justin Jefferson versus Amon-Ra St. Brown, which I actually do think is a very important one to break down. Assuming you play in more than one league, you've got probably like a 40 or a 50% chance this season of deciding between at least two of these players. And with all three possessing league-winning upside, we definitely want to know which direction we're going because you're going to feel pretty bad if you pick the only one that doesn't drop a nuke. So let's start off with Ja'Marr Chase. He's entering his fourth season in the NFL at age 24. He's coming off back-to-back, I'll say like quote-unquote disappointing seasons. On a per-game basis was totally fine, but of course, dealt with some injuries to quarterback play as well. He was the wide receiver 5 in points per game as a rookie after being one of the most hyped prospects we've ever seen at any position. So vibes were high definitely going into year 2. But then he had the hip injury, forced him to miss a month in year 2. And then we had just a whole host of injuries last season. Burrow, remember, he didn't miss time early in the year, but remember he had that calf injury in camp. That really held him back a lot more than we were expecting early in the season. So we have the downplay from Chase just because Burrow couldn't really do anything early in the season. Then we've got Burrow missing the final 7 weeks of the season with a torn ligament in his wrist. We've got Ja'Marr Chase injuring his shoulder in week 15, misses a week, limited in the final 2. That also plays into people's minds because that was, fantasy playoff time. With all that going on, Chase was 14th in points per game last season, although he was 8th in points per game before his injury. And in the 5 games where he and Burrow were both fully healthy, I know it's a small sample, but something we can look at from last season, he averaged 20.6 half PPR points per game, average stat line, 8 receptions, 107 yards, 5 touchdowns in those 5 weeks. So all of this is to say, if you actually get Burrow and Chase both healthy all season, he is a clear-cut top 5 wide receiver, extraordinarily likely to finish top 3, and has legitimate triple crown ceiling. That's when you lead in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Higgins is good. Andre is good and developing. Jermaine Burton has some upside this season. We'll see if it takes him a little bit of time to develop, though, but he has some upside this season. But Ja'Marr Chase is just different, and he's tethered to a quarterback that, yes, has dealt with pretty significant injuries in his young career, but those injuries were flukes. Joe Burrow is not a quarterback where we're like, if Burrow can, find a way to stay healthy. He's had fluke injuries that have cost him significant time because of when they happened, but they're not injuries we expect to be repeating. They're not injuries that we expect to limit him at any point this season. He should be good to go. It would have to be a completely different fluke injury, which we don't expect to happen. Chase also definitely has the highest touchdown ceiling among these 3, despite playing in 4 fewer games than Amon-Ra St. Brown and 5 fewer games than Justin Jefferson over their respective first 3 seasons. Ja'Marr Chase has 8 more receiving touchdowns than St. Brown, 4 more than Justin Jefferson. And if you count last season, because Jefferson has 1 more season played than these guys, 15 extra games played Jefferson over Ja'Marr Chase, but Jefferson only has 1 more receiving touchdown. So Chase just gets into the end zone at a much higher rate per game. It's not to say that these two can't score more touchdowns than Chase. Touchdown variance can happen. But Chase has the much higher touchdown expectation, much more likely to have that triple crown ceiling, just much more likely to have a year where because 10 to 12 touchdowns is just a strong season for basically any player. And all 3 of these guys can be in that range. But if we're thinking about who could score, 15 to 17 touchdowns and really put themselves ahead, it's Chase. He's the one that has more upside in that area. So that's Ja'Marr Chase. How about Justin Jefferson? Chase might lead in touchdowns, but no one is a match for Jefferson in yardage. No player in NFL history has more receiving yards over their first 4 seasons than Justin Jefferson, which is sort of wild because he did miss 7 games last season with a hamstring injury, and he still leads the next best wide receiver by 387 yards. That's insane. Since joining the league, he's been the wide receiver 9, 4, 2, and 5 in fantasy points per game. But if you remove the 2 games last season where he left early due to injury, his per game numbers are insane. When healthy last year, he played 8 healthy games, 7.9 receptions per game, 127 receiving yards, and half a touchdown. A season-long pace that would have been basically the exact same production that Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb had last season in points per game, but way fewer touchdowns than the both of them. And that's just been the one strange thing for Jefferson. His offenses have always been good. It hasn't been like he's on a team that's averaging 17 points per game, right? He's been on good offenses. He's never averaged less than 87 receiving yards per game, but his touchdown totals are 7, 10, 8, and 5, which is, I would say, super underwhelming given how much volume he's receiving, how many yards he's getting to only score single-digit touchdowns in 3 or 4 years. That's disappointing. This season will be his first without Kirk Cousins. Cousins tore his Achilles in week 8 last season. Then he signed with the Falcons over the offseason. When we look back last season at when Jefferson finally returned to full health after the hamstring injury, and he didn't have Kirk Cousins. He had mostly Nick Mullins at quarterback. It was like a sprinkling of Jaron Hall as well, but mostly Nick Mullins. In those 4 weeks, he still did average 7.5 receptions, 119 receiving yards, and he scored 2 touchdowns in the 4 games, while never having fewer than 10 targets. And if you look at what Nick Mullins did, he actually did have 2 games north of 395 passing yards with multiple touchdowns in both games. And that's what like still gives me a lot of hope with Justin Jefferson this season, is that, like, yes, you do look at the quarterback play and you're a little bit concerned about Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy, but we know that Jefferson is an incredible wide receiver, and we know that this coaching staff can really elevate the quarterback play. Again, they got Nick Mullins to average 306 passing yards per game last season. That's pretty darn good. So I know it's scary to look at Sam Darnold, look at McCarthy. They're not names you want to see at the quarterback position. I'd just be a lot more worried if it wasn't Justin Jefferson, right? Like, we don't need to bring up reception perception in this breakdown because we do know that all 3 of these are elite wide receivers. None of these guys are bad. They're all fantastic. But it's worth pointing out that Jefferson is still the best by a good measure. At least if we look last season, he was clearly the better wide receiver among these 3. I know it feels very close, but he crushes St. Brown against man coverage, against press coverage. Zone is like St. Brown's specialty, but Justin Jefferson was still better versus zone coverage. I wouldn't say he crushes Chase in any of the 3, but he's comfortably better against all 3 coverages. So, like, understand that, yes, quarterback play is a concern, but Justin Jefferson is likely the best wide receiver in the NFL. So if anyone can overcome it, it's him. And when you also have the good coaching, they can overcome the poor quarterback play. And who knows? Maybe in the second half of the season, McCarthy actually ends up being a good quarterback. We still don't know how good he is. That's those 2. Last one, St. Brown. Then we'll talk about how to rank all of these 3. St. Brown was the lowest ranked prospect. Doesn't really matter all that much because now we know how good they are, but he was the lowest ranked prospect among these 3 coming out of college. But then he just broke out in the second half of his rookie season. He's been getting better and better ever since then. He's finished as a wide receiver 30, 10, and then 4 last season and half PPR points per game. And he was very consistent last season. He had over 100 receiving yards in 9 of 16 weeks while having at least 95 yards or a touchdown in all but 1 game. He's an extremely consistent wide receiver that is the centerpiece of one of the best offenses in football, and he's managed to stay extremely healthy. He's only missed 2 games in his career due to injury, again, over 3 seasons. Here's my concern, though. Number 1, we always talk about how unpredictable injuries can be, right? You are injury prone until you're not. You can't get injured until you do, and then you're injury prone, right? Like, that's just kind of how it works in the NFL. Think about it. I know they're not running backs, so think about it like Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey has this huge stretch where he just like doesn't get injured. And everyone's like, oh, he can't possibly get hurt. Then he has like 2 years in a row he gets hurt, and it's like, oh, he can't possibly stay healthy. So it's like People are injury prone until they're not. People always stay healthy until they don't in the NFL. It's just a dangerous sport. Injuries happen randomly. So maybe he's slightly less likely to get injured than Chase or Jefferson. Maybe. But it's extremely marginal. And I want people to really just wrap their heads around how fluky injuries can be, and that this past few seasons shouldn't really matter all that much. I just really think his ADP, quite frankly, is this high because people look at it and they're like, well, he's going to go out there and have 100 yards or a touchdown every week. That happened last season, and it could absolutely happen again. But understand that in terms of injuries, all three are basically equally likely to get injured. Second concern, really when we look at it, it's like, how much better can his numbers be? If we're all expecting Jahmyr Gibbs to take on more of a role this season, and it seems like they want part of that role to be in the receiving game, and we're all expecting maybe a year or two bump for Laporta, pretty much every tight end in the history of the NFL, maybe besides Kyle Pitts, has made that jump from year one into year two. If he develops as a player, I mean, we're projecting him as the tight end one. Don't we think he's going to maybe command more of a workload? Or at worst, it's going to be pretty much the same as last season. We have all these positive reports from camp around Jameson Williams. He wasn't really used at all these last 2 years. But, I mean, if we think about him, yeah, he's got significant upside. And if the coaching staff really wants to finally unleash him, they're going to be designing more plays to get him the ball every week. And so that leaves us in a situation where, yes, St. Brown has one of the most locked-in roles in the league. I just question how much better his numbers can be this season. And for that reason, I am going to rank him last. I get it if you want that locked-in production because, again, I fully agree that he is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, on one of the best teams in the NFL. He's the centerpiece of the offense, and he's going to have a good year. But if you're going to draft him, if you ranked him first in this list, it'd be like fourth overall. With how many, elite players the Lions do have and how much specifically touchdown upside all those players have on the Lions, I just worry that St. Brown is extraordinarily likely to finish as a wide receiver like 4 through 8. And if you're going to take him, first on this list would be the wide receiver 3. Do I really want to take someone as like that wide receiver 3 or 4, knowing that their most likely finish is outside the top 3? It just doesn't feel amazing. I do think there's a clear top 8 players this season in fantasy. Like if you just look at the first round of fantasy, no matter the scoring format, there's a pretty clear top 8 players. And I do think that I would take Amon-Ra St. Brown 8th on that list. As for number 2, I think you have to rank Chase over Jefferson. As confident as I am that the Vikings coaching staff is going to be very, very good this season, how I think they're going to elevate the quarterback play of this team, no matter if it starts with Sam Darnold, transitions to McCarthy, no matter who's playing that given week, I do think this coaching staff is going to elevate them. We don't need that on the Bengals, right? They already have Joe Burrow. We don't need any sort of elevation of the quarterback. He's already very, very good. And while Chase has been hovering around that wide receiver 5 in points per game, he has the profile and the opportunity to post a true league-winning season where, he is the wide receiver 1 by, 1 or 2 points per game. Would I predict that to happen? Of course not. But that's not really in the range of outcomes for Amon-Ra St. Brown, or at least he'd need to get super lucky for that to happen. And then when we look at Justin Jefferson, again, I think they'll elevate the quarterbacks, but with Sam Darnold and a rookie quarterback, do we think he has the ceiling to be like the wide receiver 1 by a significant margin? And I don't know that he does this season. I think if you really want ceiling there, Ja'Marr Chase is your guy. And when we think about round 1, everyone has a locked-in floor. Every single player really ranked in the top 15 players this season has a very, very rock-solid floor. So if we're going to take a wide receiver this early, I need one that can just eviscerate the other wide receivers in this range, can break out and have a ceiling season where they have 1,800 yards and 18 touchdowns. It has to be in the range of outcomes if I'm going to take a wide receiver this early. And to me, that's Ja'Marr Chase. So my ranking is going to be Ja'Marr Chase, then Justin Jefferson, then Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that will be the same across all scoring formats. It gets much, much, much closer when we talk about full PPR, and I would be okay if you want to start moving Amon-Ra St. Brown a little bit up in full PPR, just because touchdowns matter, but they matter a little bit less than the receptions. We know that's locked in for Amon-Ra St. Brown. So if you wanted to move him up a little bit, I'd be fine with that. But again, I think all formats, Chase, Justin Jefferson, then Amon-Ra St. Brown. So let me know what trio you want me to break down next week in the comment section below. Upvote the responses that you agree with. And if you want to see my exact rankings on every single player in every single scoring format, you can see that on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Please leave a like if you watched this far. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you are new here so you don't miss out on any free content. That, my friends, is the end of this one, and thanks for watching.